Hello, my mathematicians. This is Miss Foster with Math in Focus, Grade 4, Chapter 6, Lesson 8, Real Word Problems with Fractions. Friends, you have learned so many things that in our study of fractions. You've learned about equivalent fractions, adding and subtracting with a like denominator or like fractions. We've talked about fractions of a set and comparing fractions and so much. Now you're going to see everything you learned applied in a whole bunch of word problems. And this is taking our thinking to the next level because first we want you to know it and understand it. But if you use it, then you will understand it even better. It's a higher level of thinking. And to really get at these word problems, you're also going to have to do a lot of analysis, breaking the problems up into their separate parts and evaluating them to see what's important and even synthesizing everything you know to find the answer. All the great levels of thinking. Now, if we're solving word problems with Math in Focus or Miss Foster, you know we're drawing all the bar models. I love them. So before we get going, quick reminders. When we read a problem, first we just read it, just to get a sense, to get our heads in the game. And then when I make word problems, I like to start by identifying who is this problem about and what is this problem about. Specifically, what am I counting? We're going to have things we're counting and groups we're counting in some of these problems. We're going to be using multiplication and division a lot. Boy. Then we just draw the bar or bars that we want to use. I've noticed with our fraction problems that I usually just want one, but that may not be the case. Then we reread and we stop at every piece of punctuation to redraw and label things in our pictures. And then we mathematize, which is Dr. Buller's word for actually doing the math. We want to see you showing your work. Every middle school and upper school teacher I have ever met wants you to show your work. Don't hold back, you guys. Don't be so proud that you can just do it in your head. We're getting into multiple step problems here. You're going to be able to do parts of this in your head, but we need to see your thinking because if you get part number 2 wrong, but do the rest correctly, then your middle school geometry teacher will be like, I'm only taking 1 point out of 5 because we can see where the mistake was. So you want to show everything. Now then we are asking you to answer in a complete sentence. And that is so that you have to go back and reread the problem and then figure out, does my answer make sense? You can check it that way, but also by using the opposite operation if you need to. So we've got lots of different things to try here. Let's get going. So the first one is adding more than one fraction. 3 friends shared a grapefruit. Elena ate a third of the grapefruit. Lee ate a ninth of the grapefruit, and Sarah ate 3/9 of the grapefruit. What fraction of the grapefruit did they eat altogether? Well, let's see. I would have labeled this. I would have called it a grapefruit. And here's Elena. I'm just going to draw this little bracket here and say that this is Elena's part. Oh, Lee ate just one. This is Lee's part. And then here we have Sarah's part right here. I like to label that stuff. And then I notice that I'm trying to add 1/3 plus 1/9 plus 3/9. And look, they've found the problem. The problem is we can't add parts that are not the same size. So we had to take this 1/3, and I'm going to show this to you. If I were to divide it up into 3 parts, I'd have 1 part, 2 part, 3 parts. And if I take one of those thirds and divide it into 3 parts each, I will have ninths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so by finding that common denominator, we can figure out the answer. So I'm going to use equivalent fractions to multiply it by 3/3. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 times 3 is 9. Then I've got 3/9 plus 1/9 plus 3/9. And I'm going to wind up with 7/9. Sweet. Now let's try it here where we don't have it all drawn for you. Sean, Roger, and Damon each drank different amounts of milk one day. Sean drank 5/6 quart of milk. Roger drank 7/12 quart of milk. And Damon drank 11/12 quart of milk. How much did they drink altogether? Well, just to save time, I already drew my bar model, but I want to gently show to you that I started off by drawing each of them a bar. I'm giving each one a bar this time. Sean's, Rogers, and Damon's, you are allowed to abbreviate. Use all the abbreviations you want. And I decided that each box would stand for a quart of milk. So first I took the boxes and I divided them into 6, and I saw that Sean ate 5 6, drank. And then I took Roger's and Damon's. They both have 12ths going on there. So I showed Roger's 7/12 and Damon's 11/12. But then I knew I was going to have to get these all to be the same size. So here is what we could write. Please get out of the way, little rectangle. Thank you. We're doing 5/6 plus 7/12 plus 11/12. Now I can divide 12 by 2 to get down to 6ths, but I can't divide 7 by 2, and I can't divide 11 by 2. So instead I'm going to use my multiplication strategy here and multiply 5/6 by 2 halves. And here's what that would literally look like. I am doing 5 times 2, which would be 10, and 6 times 2 would be 12, and we multiply them both by the same factor because look, do you see me? I cut every one of those pieces into halves. Each one of these 6 has been divided into 2 halves, this half and that half. And now you can see the pieces are all the same size. We just need to bring our math along with it. So here I've got 10/12 plus 7/12 plus 11/12. Huge shout out to those of you who are doing all of this writing. This is showing your work. This is what we want to see. Ranveer, Mia, every time you are doing this. You guys, you can do it too. There's nothing magical about those two except that they're absolutely wonderful. So show all this work. When I add it all up, let's see, 10 plus 11 is 21, and 21 plus 7 will be 28/12. And I will wind up with this beautiful improper fraction. But is this its simplest form? Aha! Remember doing simplest form? We're going to express all our answers in their simplest form. So let me see. How many groups of 12 can I get out of the number 28? Well, I know I can get at least one. 12 plus 12 is 24, so I think I can get 2. If I had 28 and I took away 24, then that would leave me with 4 of them, right? So I'm going to propose that we have 2 and 4/12 of quarts of milk. But am I at my simplest form yet? I don't believe so, because 4 and 12 share a factor, and the factor they share is 4. So if I take 4/12 and I divide it by a variation of 1, this time being 4/4, and you know, anything that you take that you divide by 1 will be itself, right? So we're bringing all this together. Here's the synthesis. Well, 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 12 divided by 4 is 3. And so the answer in the simplest form would be 12 1/3. Now, I am only given 15 minutes of recording time. I am not going to show you me writing out my answer here, but I do expect you to do it. It's just that I'm trying to save some time. All right, so that would be an addition challenge. Now we're moving on to a subtraction challenge. So let's see what's going on here. Cheryl and Dennis shared an apple. Cheryl ate 2/5 of the apple. Dennis ate 3/10 of the apple. What fraction of the apple was left? Well, I think 2/5 right here, this would be Cheryl's, and this would be Dennis's. And we notice that they are different size pieces. So really the fifths are this big. That's how many fifths we have. But you can see that with an odd number of tenths, there's no way we're going to be able to use fifths. So we're going to use our equivalent fraction skills to multiply 2/5 by 2 halves. And 2 times 2 is 4, 5 times 2 is 10. Now we can do 4 tenths plus 3/10, and we will find that the answer is 7/10. Is that in its simplest form? Well, 7 is a prime number, so its only factors are 7 and 1, and 7 is not a factor of 10. So we found it. This is our simplest form. Let's try a little bit more. And we have more than one method here when we're dealing with subtraction. You get to have some choices in this. So the book really wants you to look at it from 2 different angles. Don't try just one method and stick with it. We want you thinking in a more complex way than that. And I really believe that you can do this. It may feel like a struggle, but we're going to do both ways. So a craft store has a 9-yard spool of ribbon. A spool is when it's all like wound around one thing. In the morning, a customer buys 1/5 yard of ribbon from the spool. In the afternoon, another customer buys 7/10 yard of ribbon from the spool. How much ribbon is left? Well, in the first method, they start with 9, and then they subtract 1/5, and then they subtract 7/10. And then what they did is they said, okay, if I'm going to do it that way, I'm going to use my equivalent mixed numbers and improper fractions to take 1 away from 9 and go down to 8 and 10 tenths. Now remember, 10 tenths is a 1, so we still have the same amount. We're just changing how we look at it. And then I still need to take away 1/5 and 7 tenths. Since we seem to be using tenths here, let's go ahead and multiply 1/5 by 2 halves. And if I do that, 1 times 2 is 2, and 5 times 2 is 10. So now I'm going 8 tenths, take away 2 tenths, take away 7 tenths, and that would be take away 9 tenths. And 8 tenths, take away 8 and 10 tenths, take away 9 and 10 tenths. 9 tenths equals 8 and 1 tenths. Oh my goodness, you can just hear it gets so muddled. There was a lot of steps to this, don't you think? So many steps. And that's why you really want to read it and draw it out. We'll draw in the next one. Now, method 2 is to take these two groups here and put them together and say, okay, I'm changing 1/5 to 2 tenths. Same as we did on the last problem. 2 tenths plus 7 tenths becomes 9 tenths. And then I do the regrouping and kind of subtract it all at once. Now, I'm going to draw a little heart next to this because I love it best. But if you like this way, and I want you to try that way, just like I had to try that way, then do. Oh, Terry. Terry had to travel 12 miles from town A to town B. He traveled 5/8 of a mile by bus. He traveled another round 1/4 of a mile by car just before the car broke down. How far was he from town B when the car broke down? It looks like we are not drawing this. They really want you to pay attention to these two methods. So in this one, first we regroup. 12 becomes 11, and let's see, we've got to make a decision here. What size pieces are we going to use? Well, 8 divided by 2 is 4, but you can't divide 5 by 2. 2 is not one of its factors, and we don't want fractions of fractions. That would be silly. So I think we should use our equivalent fraction skills to make 1/4 into 8ths. So I'm going to change 12, that whole number, into an improper fraction of 11 and 8/8. Then, just going to borrow that right there. Oh, can I clone it? That's even better. So this is 11 and 8/8 there. And we're taking away 5/8, and we're also taking away, let's see, we're going to multiply this by 2 halves. 1 times 2 is 2. 4 times 2 is 8. And both of these are negative. This is a negative 2/8, and this is a negative 5/8. That means subtract 5/8 and then subtract 2/8. So 8 minus 5 is 3, and 3 minus 2 is 1, which brings me to my answer of 11 and 1/8 miles. Method 2 would be to take these two and put them together. And we're going to use the same denominator. So there, do you see how they're making you go step by step here? And I just want to remind you that that's how our workbook is. They really want to make sure they're taking you step by step. Now, for some of us, that's great. But if you happen to be thinking through this a little bit faster, this might feel a little gummy. Don't let it trip you up. Slow yourself down. Take a moment to recognize all the steps. This comes together to be 7/8. And then, of course, we would have 12 minus 7/8, and we would then change that to 11 and 8/8 minus 7/8, and I'm not going to write this anymore. You're going to get back to here. Then here's the sentence. He was 11 and 1/8 miles from town B when the car broke down. Now, my friends, there are still 3 more kinds of problems that you will meet in this lesson. But when I glance down at my clock here, I am running out of time. So this is the first video. There's going to be a second one. Please watch all the videos before you go into the work so that you can figure out which kind of problem is happening where. And I will be back super soon with your next video. Bye-bye for now.